Welcome to episode 6 of ADHD Chatter. I wanted to try something a little bit differently this week. I wanted to just read out a message that I had from one of the listeners. I've had so many messages and I appreciate all of them, and it does remind me why I'm doing the podcast. So this is one I had. It says, I just want to say such a big thank you. This podcast has already helped me so much, more than I can explain. I've always felt a bit different, and I was always the loud girl in the group. But deep down, the anxiety was overwhelming. I think it was masked for so long with a jam-packed, busy social life and schedule, and honestly, it wasn't until COVID hit in the last couple of years where something clicked in me, and I started noticing all the signs and linking it back to my childhood. So I, for a while, suspected I have ADHD, but I feel some people think it's just a trend. But this podcast has already made me feel so much more validated and understood. So anyway, just a huge thank you. The relief of being understood brought me to tears. That's it. So yeah, thank you. I mean, it's messages like that which really motivate me to do this podcast. If you do want to ask me anything or let me know anything, you can message me on Instagram or TikTok. If you just search for ADHD Chatter, then you'll find my accounts and you can message me on there. Okay, let's carry on as normal. This week, I speak to a remarkable man called Grange. Jay's early years were turbulent, but after his ADHD diagnosis, he found music, and he's since been featured on the BBC, Channel 5 and GB News. His diagnosis also set him on a path to become a neurodiversity advocate. He's spoken on stages all over the world, including for the United Nations. He's an ambassador for the ADHD Foundation and the Prince's Trust, and he's only 21 years old. His knowledge is unbelievable. I learned so much from Jay. His story is full of twists and turns. It truly is fascinating. I'll let the episode speak for itself. Here we go. Hello, Jay. This episode is one I've been particularly excited about because I think your journey is one that's kind of gone full circle, reading about the stuff that's happened in the past and what you're doing now. It's a story that fascinated me, and I think that it's going to be one that the audience will find hugely inspiring. So thank you for coming on.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pleasure. Thank you, Alex. I'm looking forward to this podcast series of yours, ADHD Chatter. It's great to be on, to tell my story, a bit about my journey, the place I was in to where I am now. And yeah, I'm so excited for it. Like yourself, I've been excited for the last week, planning this, thinking what I'm going to answer to questions, and I'm really excited. So yeah, I think we should just get on with this because this is amazing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's so many places in your story I could start, but I think the one question that I'm keen to ask everyone is, based on your understanding and knowledge of ADHD now, what do you think your earliest memory of displaying traits was?
I'd say probably the earliest memory of, realizing maybe I've got ADHD and some of my traits was probably when I was in year 7 and just going into secondary school. Primary school was always brilliant. I was actually top of the class with this other kid called Luke, and me and him were actually ahead of everybody else. We actually had our own class. So it was just me and him ahead of the whole year group in a class doing the work because we just excelled so quickly. But that felt different in a good way. And actually, that was a good isolation, as it were. The ones that I then went on to have not so good, and the situations that I had not so good as well. But I would say, yeah, year 6, year 1 to year 6, primary school, amazing. Never any problems at home, in school, feeling different, anything like that. Then it got to year 7, going to secondary school, and that's when the problems started to happen. And that's when I felt misunderstood, felt like I could have traits of ADHD, and felt like there was just something different about me. I saw everybody else in the playground, everybody else in the classroom, and they just all seemed different to me. Every single one of them. And I just felt like, why am I different? So I started to sort of notice something, because I thought there must be a reason for this. Why am I different? Why do I feel different? So it was sort of that process of actually seeing how it goes, and actually, is this something that's really going to cause me problems, or is this maybe just me, settling into secondary school? Because it's not easy, is it, for a lot of people. So maybe it isn't to do with something like ADHD. Maybe it's just, I was finding it hard to fit in and to get into that new, secondary school, more people, different areas, different ages. But yeah, as it went on, so the start of year 7 towards the end of year 7, there was a huge, change in sort of my behaviour and actually my mental health and everything. And just something didn't feel right. And it was the same through year 7, year 8, year 9. at my first school I went to. And then it got to a point where I was having so much trouble in school, I was feeling misunderstood by everybody, that actually I got permanently kicked out of this school and moved to another area. Now, when I moved to the other area, we thought maybe this will be a fresh start. Maybe this is a change. I won't feel misunderstood. I won't feel different. But actually, I felt even more different. Coming from London, moving an area, and change is not the best for everybody, but especially, neurodivergent people. So this was tough for me. And at this school is really when I started noticing more and more that, yeah, I think I've got ADHD. I definitely have. And in the meantime of this, my parents had already sort of started to look for diagnoses and stuff like that, just in case it got further and got worse. I was on the NHS waiting list for about 5 years, and then we eventually went private when I was in year 11, my last year of school. So, you can imagine I went through that whole time at school with no diagnosis, not understanding myself. But in answer to your question, I've explained a lot there, a bit more about my story as well. But it was definitely from year 7 onwards, especially year 8 and year 9, that I started feeling like, actually, yeah, I reckon I've got ADHD, or there is definitely something different. It's not just me, struggling to adapt to secondary school or anything like that.
That's really fascinating, and thanks for being so open and honest about it. I read in one of your online bios, it said you felt anger, frustration, despair, and the constant feeling of being misunderstood. And you've summarised that nicely as well in your history just then. I mean, it is a real struggle, I think, for children if they think that they're different to the other kids in the class for whatever reason. I think back from my own kind of childhood. I mean, I think ADHD manifests itself in different ways for different people. And I was always quite isolated myself. I was never really a problem child, but I do remember feeling like intense feelings in response to rejection. And that's probably my sort of earliest memory of experiencing ADHD traits. So you didn't get support initially from the teachers, but when you moved to your new school, you said they started to recognise traits then?
Yeah, I mean, I did not get any support at all, to be totally honest with you, Alex, in my first school and my second school, but especially actually the second school, because they actually said to me, you could have ADHD, you could have autism, but they never wanted to support me. Where actually the school I was at before, they didn't have a clue, to be totally honest with you. It never even entered their minds. At my first school, I was seeing Senkos, and they were saying to me, you're either mad or you're bad. And you, Jay, you are just a bad kid. My second school that I went to, I expected, support, because I thought, surely it can't be as bad as the first school I went to. And actually, surely not every school is like this. And maybe someone will eventually understand me. So I went to my new school, and like I said to you at the start here, they actually said, you could have ADHD or autism or dyslexia, a neurodivergent condition. Nothing, no support whatsoever. In fact, they tried to do things like toilet passes, which in fact made me feel even more different to everybody else. Because if I'm going to constantly keep asking to go to the toilet, then other kids in my class are already going to think, why does this kid always need to go to the toilet? None of us do. And it was just every time I got in trouble, I tried to reason with them about my ADHD and say, look, I don't mean to be like this. I don't get up in the morning and think, I'm going to go in school today and I'm going to muck around. It's just things, maybe it's because of the frustration I'm feeling, because of the anger I'm feeling, and maybe my behaviour is communication. And I'm trying to say to you, look, I want to be helped and I want to behave in the right way in education to get a good education. So yeah, the second school for me was a really challenging time, and that led to anger, depression, despair, all them words and, feelings that you saw in that article of mine, where it takes its toll, because when you feel so misunderstood for such a long amount of time, it really does get to you. I was just thinking, why does nobody understand me? Parents, family, teachers, friends, everybody else in the school, not just teachers, canteen staff, midday assistants, cleaners, you name it, I felt misunderstood by everybody. So yeah, it did start taking its toll, and I went down a wrong path and down a really negative sort of journey in my life.
Did you find that when you were acting out and just feeling frustrated in these schools because you were misunderstood, and I suppose there wasn't the awareness to pick up on the traits and to say, oh, Jay, he should get assessed for ADHD, but I guess that did happen eventually. But when it didn't happen, and that frustration and then the acting out and being the naughty kid, I suppose that must have compounded your frustration to the point where it could quite easily spiral out of control. Did you find that it was like a compounding effect. You were frustrated, therefore you were acting out, and then because you were acting out, you were getting more frustrated by the response you were getting, which just made you feel more misunderstood.
Yeah, I'd say definitely in regards to like, like naughty behavior and stuff like that, I'd say that actually, it wasn't naughty behavior on my part. It was more just, I was struggling with the education system like so many neurodivergent people do. And when you see the stats, like 7 out of every 10 young people that get excluded from school have SEMH or a neurodivergent condition, you can see that this system is not adapted to people like us, the 1 in 5 who are neurodivergent. So I wouldn't necessarily say my behavior was naughty, but what it was because, like you say, because of all the frustration that I felt, all the anger that I felt, that then, kept piling up, and then I eventually exploded. And the place to do that was school, because that's where I felt the most frustrated. That's where I felt the most misunderstood. And that's where I was having most problems in my life. So that's why in school, I did get, fixed term exclusions many times. I did get permanently excluded from 2 schools, nearly 3 schools, because the more it was going on and the more I felt misunderstood, the more you could see that reflect in my behaviour, and the more that I was getting, constant detentions, constant exclusions, my anger was getting worse, really bad anger management that I was facing as well, and all the different things. And it all comes back down to that word, frustration, because frustration then leads to anger.
It's a word. It was the 2 words, frustration and misunderstood, that I hear time and time again. It's kind of like the one word that the 2 words that keep cropping up when I speak to people who are perhaps a little bit older or had a later diagnosis, or it was the life pre-diagnosis and before the validation. It's the confusion and it's the frustration and it's the feeling of being misunderstood. And I suppose you were quite young when you got your diagnosis, right? You were how old were you when you got your diagnosis?
I was 16 when I got
16,
my diagnosis,
yeah.
so not too young as such, because I still went through the whole schooling without the diagnosis, without that validation, without that understanding. But still, yeah, compared to other people I know, there's a lot later diagnoses as well. So I'd say I'm in the middle, around 16, year 11, just finishing secondary school is when I got my diagnosis.
If you could say something to your sort of younger self pre-diagnosis, knowing what you know now, what would that be?
I wish I'd have embraced myself more, and actually realised, actually, you've got ADHD, you're a neurodivergent person, but that doesn't define you. It doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't make you a lazy person, a naughty person. It doesn't make you not a valid member of society. It's just that you think differently. And I wish I just had embraced that in school, actually that thinking differently, could I have reasoned with the teachers? Could I have spoke to the teachers and said, look, this is my passions. This is what I'm passionate about. I'm a neurodivergent person. Can we do something to work on this? And I wish I had focused on my strengths, because even when I was younger, I used to have a lot of strengths. I still have a lot of strengths, but then I didn't notice them as such. And I wish I had looked back and, actually realised that all the amazing things I was actually doing that got overshadowed by the constant exclusions, by the constant, problems at home with my family. So I'd say to my younger self as well, and I say this to any, younger person that's watching this, who's for teenage years, for example, or late or early 20s, or, whatever age you are, in fact, embrace your neurodivergence, because actually it's a positive and a negative. Too many times we hear about the negatives regarding neurodiversity, ADHD, dyscalculia, dyslexia, etc. But actually there's so many positives. The creative thinking, being spontaneous, thinking outside the box. We could be sitting here all day, Alex, if we said all the positive things about being neurodivergent. And I know we're going to speak a bit more about this later, actually, the positives and the negatives of having ADHD and my experiences. So yeah, I think in summary, to say to my younger self, I'd just say embrace who you are, Jay. Embrace that you've got ADHD. Don't listen to all them, the negative things that people told me. Like, most people like you end up in prison. You're automatically low and bottom set because you've got ADHD, even though I was predicted A stars and 1 mark away from going to a grammar school. So there's so many different areas here that I got told, what a lot of neurodivergent people get told, all those negative stats, or you'll end up in prison, you'll amount to nothing. So yeah, so I actually wish I had seen, what I was going to become and what I am now back then, because I really would have started doing it more and quicker, learning more about ADHD, learning more about myself, and how actually I could be more of a role model at that stage to actually other people like me that were struggling as well.
It sounds like you're similar to a lot of people I speak to with ADHD. You're when you get that validation and you have that understanding, that's kind of when you start doing great things. You know, the amazing work you're doing now, we'll go on to that a bit later on, but when you get that diagnosis and the more you understand about ADHD, you then you begin to see that actually there's nothing wrong with you. You're just positioned in a world where there's so many things going against us. We're sort of swimming against the tide. And when you know that, then you can kind of lean into your strengths and put systems in place to mitigate the pitfalls. One thing I wanted to speak about was the diagnosis process was interesting for me. It was I was very fortunate to go private, and it took about 8 weeks. But it was an intense period of questions that really opened up my past and made me. I've got a history of alcoholic behaviour. A lot of my ADHD traits kind of manifested into drinking too much. So it really sort of opened up a can of worms that I kind of had compartmentalized and put to one side. And so for me, it was kind of having to re-explore that, putting it all out in front of me and asking a psychiatrist to analyze it and comment on it. And so if it was quite a brutal process. I mean, how did you find the assessment period?
For me, the assessment period wasn't too bad. I mean, but the pre-assessment period was, really bad. The waiting for many years on waiting lists, getting, pushed from pillar to post, that really took its toll on my mental well-being and took a toll on me and my life. And I feel that the actual period when I eventually went private, like yourself, you said, well, I did go private, which a lot of people, if they're fortunate enough to do, which actually at the time I wasn't really, but me and my dad kept pushing and pushing and pushing. We wanted me to get that diagnosis and we was going to do anything in our power to get that. So I did eventually go private after many years on the waiting list, like I said. And that period was, I didn't think it was tense actually, because for the first time I felt listened to, I felt understood, and I actually felt like we're getting somewhere. I've never felt like that before. So when I got that diagnosis, it wasn't a yes, I've got ADHD, woohoo sort of thing, but it was a, maybe, just maybe this is why I've been misunderstood. This is why, I've gone down the wrong path, done the wrong things, been misunderstood, haven't been supported. So it was more like that for me when I got the diagnosis. Actually, yes, this is who I am. But let me just add something. When I got diagnosed and when I got that label, which it really is actually, because, it's just almost like a validation, yourself, it's more of that label, which, I think we're too big into labels at society right now. Everybody's labelled with something. I really felt like I want to learn more about ADHD when I got diagnosed. But when I looked online and I typed in ADHD, I just saw all negative stuff. So, for example, I called them the D words, Alex. So ADHD, there's 2 D words in there, deficit and disorder. Now, I'm a big football fan. I'm a big sports fan. So if my team's losing, we say, we've got a deficit, we're behind. So it's a negative word, deficit. And also disorder. I believe, even disabled, disorder, any word that begins with dis is normally negative. There's not too many words you can think of that start with dis that is actually a positive word. So there's all these negative D words around neurodiversity. So even when I was looking after my diagnosis, I thought, actually, yes, maybe having ADHD is a great thing to have. There wasn't much I could find online. So like I say, in answer to your question, when I first got diagnosed and when I was going through the process of getting diagnosed, I was actually quite relieved. I was happy. And eventually I felt like somebody was listening, supporting me, and actually we was getting somewhere.
Yeah, I can relate. The psychiatrist came back and said my ADHD was clear as hell. And I think I suspected it for a long time. It was only after I saw certain bits of content online that I sort of went down the assessment route. And it was when she came back and said, yeah, you meet the criteria for a diagnosis, then for a couple of weeks I was just, oh, well, I knew that, so it doesn't change anything. But actually, as further weeks went on, for me, I went through stages of it. The first stage was, well, I knew that, so nothing changes. The second stage was kind of going back and looking at events in my life and thinking, oh, I can probably pinpoint that outcome to that characteristic or that ADHD trait. And and even that segment of the journey, I suppose, comes with some interesting emotions, I found. I don't know if you had any frustration at all in looking back and thinking, if this had been picked up a little bit earlier, maybe. And you've obviously done great things, but I think there's probably a lot of people who might get diagnosed later in life and get frustration at the system for not recognizing it earlier and offering them support, which could potentially, make a big difference to the trajectory of outcomes. Did you ever feel frustration at stages after the diagnosis?
Yeah, I felt frustration before and after the diagnosis. I mean, before, because like what you were saying, there were so many times that I was in positions where I knew it was something, and it was so obvious, but there was never any support there. There was never any understanding. And I think, especially like with what you said about your diagnosis, your ADHD is clear. I mean, the guy who diagnosed me privately said, I can't believe it's taken this long for you to have any support, for people to say you've got ADHD. He said, without being rude, it's obvious within seconds you've got ADHD from speaking to you and finding out about your life. So that, yeah, definitely, because I feel fouled, actually. I do feel fouled. I feel by systems that, let's be fair, are there in life that actually benefit a certain type of people. And if you're not in that group, you're most likely to foul unless you get support. So I felt, frustrated with everything and angered by everyone and, school, family, parents, people in authority. Just, there were so many feelings I had. And I think that I can imagine so many other people, that have neurodivergent people that have had experiences that they think, wow, if I had have had that diagnosis, none of this would have happened. Or maybe I would have had support there, it wouldn't have happened. Or even if I had just been heard, it wouldn't have happened, even without a diagnosis, just if someone was there to support me. So I think, yeah, definitely, I think, having that label, as it were, but having that diagnosis, having that validation does almost, it's a great thing, but also it does almost make it worse afterwards, because you think, wow, for so many years I've had this and it's never been understood. It's led me to so many problems that actually, if I had have had what I've got now, wouldn't have happened. So you almost feel like, since I got my diagnosis, I didn't really need it from there, because actually I probably needed it for a few months afterwards because I was doing my GCSEs. I was really going down the wrong path, getting in trouble with police and stuff like that. But actually, when I think about now and the last few years and all the amazing stuff I've been doing, I don't really feel, because I'm supported now, I've got a supportive girlfriend, I've got a supportive family, I've got supportive people around me. It almost feels like the diagnosis isn't as, what's the right word here? Isn't as important, but, it's still good to have that. But actually, I don't really need it because I am supported now, and actually because society takes me in. And don't get me wrong, there's still days where I'm masking and I feel like, wow, I cannot sort of be in this neurotypical world. I feel like if I act the way I normally do, people are just going to go, what is wrong with him? But on the whole, I'm supported, and actually, I'm in a good place now, and having that diagnosis did help at the time. But I think once you get supported anyway, it's not as key as it is if you're really struggling, you need that diagnosis.
Was there a specific moment that led you to get the assessment originally?
Yeah, I mean, there was, like you say, it was a gradual build-up of things, but there was, one or two main things that, me and my family thought, right, something's got to be done now. It can't continue like this. And it was actually when I went to court and I was really going down the wrong path. And also I was struggling with mental health really badly, and I was suicidal too. So these were the two main points where actually, my life was nearly ending because of the suicidal thoughts, and actually nearly committing suicide as well. But actually going to court where actually, even if I hadn't have committed suicide, I would have had my freedoms taken away. I would have been in a place where, I had actually been told by a few people, you will end up there because you're a neurodivergent. So they were probably two moments in my life where I thought, right, now something has to be done. Regardless of what we do to get it, something has to be done. I need that diagnosis. I need validation. I need to know I've got ADHD, because the more things that were building up, the more things that were happening in life, I could tell more and more. So yeah, so it was a really challenging time, and it was them two moments that we thought, right, something needs to be done here. And I think, but again, that's just like life in general, isn't it? When things really, when things hit the fan and it gets really negative, it's almost like that's when people wake up. That's when people realize, the support isn't there beforehand. Everybody waits until you're in a real crisis, if you get what I'm saying. The The amount of people you hear that say, I never got any support until it was too late.
For sure, yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people suffer in silence. I can 100% relate to that. I mean, I get hugely anxious about not achieving certain things that I want to do, and it always manifested in drinking for me. That's how I dealt with the anxiety, and it was never really problematic from the outside. It was only when I would text my friends or family and saying, I'm in the hospital, I've gone on a 3-day bender, and it would always be a shock to them. It was never like, oh, we thought this might happen. One day I was just wearing a suit and going to a business meeting, talking on stages, nothing exterior to show that I was sort of struggling underneath. And then because I never vocalized it, and I think that's the same with a lot of people. I mean, if it's really, I find it quite distressing to know that a lot of people suffer in silence, and you sort of see it. Whenever there is a crisis, like you said, it seems to, from the outside world, it appears to just come out of nowhere. What do you think people can do to? It's a big question, and I don't really know what the answer is. If you had a friend who you suspected was really struggling inside, it's a tricky one. How would you go about offering your support?
Like you say, it's very tricky. It's one of it because everybody's different. Everyone has different struggles and challenges. And like you say, because people don't really talk, up about it, because maybe of stigmas in society, or, especially, in regards to myself and yourself, being guys, maybe, we don't really want to open up about it too much. And because of the, the fear of actually, will make us look weak and like we're not, all that nonsense that, you hear a lot of the time. So I think it's a very tricky question. It really is, Alex. I'd say just offer your support as much as you can, because I don't think you can ever be in somebody's shoes. You can experience stuff like they have, but you can't ever. I think it's just offering your support and saying, look, I am neurodivergent. I can, I've had challenges as well. If you want to reach out and speak to me, please do. Because it's very vital that we talk, especially in this day and age where, more and more people are suffering with mental health issues, but there's more and more social media. So there's more and more people we can talk to. There is more support there. But actually it is just having that. I think a lot of people, especially me, when I was young, I didn't reach out to anybody. There's nobody I told about my struggles. Obviously people like my parents could see from the constant anger, the stuff I was doing to myself. But actually, almost like you say, like people you didn't know. People just thought at this time, he's just, misbehaving in school, he's struggling, and that was it. People actually didn't really know what was actually going on to the extent it was going on. So it is a very hard question, but I think it's just all down to offering your support and just having that, offering your shoulder for somebody to lean on and say, look, I will try to support you as much as I can. Because remember, a lot of people don't feel supported. I didn't, when I was younger. I didn't feel supported by, people in education, by people in authority, even by my parents. So yes, a lot of the people that you'd first go to aren't there to support a lot of people as well. So it's down to actually using your, platform like, say, we've got now, but actually at the time as well, just using your experiences to try and relate to people and guide them and try and support them in a tough time.
I didn't actually mean to get onto such a down topic, I suppose. I was sort of, if anyone is listening, I don't really want to get too far into this because I don't think I'm qualified to speak about it, but I will put some links to, if you are listening and you are struggling with your ADHD, I will put some links in the show notes, which can offer some support. Stigma is something I think I've struggled with ADHD, the stigma around ADHD, and in fact it's something that actually stopped me from announcing that I was going to get an assessment straight away. I did end up posting it on LinkedIn saying I'm going to get assessed for ADHD, and now I speak a lot about ADHD, but originally my original thought was if I announce it, this will potentially negatively affect my professional reputation. And that was only 6 months ago. And that just shows you how far or how little I knew about it, which is mad because I've lived with it unknowingly for so long. But I think it just shows you the strength of how big the stigma is. And when I realized how big the stigma is, that's when I realized that I had to speak out about it, because I personally don't relate or identify with much of the stigma at all. And I think there are a lot of kids who will be starting their ADHD journey, or adults starting their ADHD research journey, and they'll come across content and they'll see a lot of unhelpful, inaccurate stuff. Like, I think the gap between the stigma and the reality of what it's like to live with ADHD is closing. And I think there's loads of people now with ADHD speaking out and trying to create a more balanced narrative around what it's really like. Like you said, there are plenty of strengths, there are plenty of weaknesses. I think a lot of content you see is quite binary. It's either, it's super amazing or it's super bad. And I think the reality is probably somewhere in the middle. You mentioned loads of the strengths, and that's amazing. I think there are loads, creativity, great problem solvers. I definitely put some of my ADHD traits down to me creating communities on social media, which has led to huge, personal success. But at the same time, I'm aware that they sort of come hand in hand with various weaknesses. And as I'm a bit older and more experienced now, I know I've put systems in place to mitigate those. What do you think are your, and I don't know if it's unhelpful to say, but what do you think your strengths and weaknesses are that you attribute to ADHD? And I guess it'd be helpful, because there are a lot of people with ADHD who listen to people like you and me and other people, and they say, I don't relate to any of your strengths, or I'm all I'm seeing is the negatives. And there's potentially this gap forming of people who are really struggling, and they're seeing people online talking about it in a way that they're trying to be positive, but actually you're just sort of creating this unhealthy comparison. And I'm trying to position myself in the middle. What do you think is a helpful message to people who think they have ADHD, really struggling, and at the moment they're not experiencing or not identifying with some of the positives that people are shouting about?
Yeah, I'd say in regards to your first question, what are the positives, what are the negatives? Positives, there's loads, especially now. I do believe there's more positives than negatives to me. So, like the ones I mentioned before, but the creative thinking, spontaneous, thinking outside the box, hyper focus, really being engaged in, all these different values I've got, like honesty, integrity. There's so many things that I believe is down to my neurodivergence. The negatives, I always say this to people. I think, yes, there is a lot of negatives of having ADHD and other neurodivergent conditions. But what I'd say to this is actually, it's because of society more than you. Now, what I'm trying to say by that is, it's like me, the things that were almost negative to me, like my anger, like my frustration, like my ADHD, me paranoid, it made me overthink, it made me very, fidgety and all the different things, lack of concentration. A lot of that I think was actually down to society, not myself. So when I think of the lack of concentration, it's because I didn't care one jot about the education system that I was learning, because my mind thinks differently. When I think about the struggles I had, feeling frustrated, maybe it wasn't because of my ADHD, maybe it's because people in society wasn't understanding it and there wasn't that support there. So I think in regards to me, actually a lot of those negatives that my ADHD did create, and don't get me wrong, and I said this to you before when we've spoken, it's a negative thing to have a lot of the time. It's not easy having ADHD, it's not all happy days, life is amazing. But I do think that life could be a lot better when you've got that support around you, when society is inclusive of you. And in regards to what you said, secondly, if you just don't mind repeating about, what is advice to people that are maybe struggling.
Yeah, it's if someone, firstly, yeah, you're spot on. Like, I don't actually think, I agree with you. There aren't any, we're not broken in any way. I think we struggle to function in a world that isn't designed to accommodate us. In certain aspects, and in some aspects we can thrive, and in other aspects there's like a clash of how our brain operates and how the world operates, and that can create a lot of unpleasant feelings in people. So if someone is in a position right now, which I think, judging by the narrative I've read, there's quite a few people who will have ADHD, and they're not identifying right now with the strengths, and they're feeling quite hopeless, or they're feeling like they're seeing all these people doing amazing things with ADHD and they don't see that in themselves. What would you say to those people?
I'd say it's very easy to get distracted and look at, we see it daily on TikTok, on LinkedIn. We see other people's stories, we see other people with ADHD stories, and I think that's just social media in general. We always see other people and think, oh, their life looks better than mine, or I've got a way better life than them. Do you know what I mean? It portrays a picture of everybody. I think if you're struggling and you can't find any strengths right now of being neurodivergent or having ADHD, because, for example, you're seeing other things online where actually you've seen this person maybe do this or that person do this, I think realize that, everybody's journey is different. Everybody starts at different places. They might have had more support than you, or, there's so many different things here. And, I'm not an expert in that sense. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist where I can actually say, these are the reasons why, from that sort of point of view, in regards to your ADHD and how you're feeling, and, I can't diagnose you myself, sort of thing, and diagnose those strengths and weaknesses. But what I'd say is just focus on you and focus on your strengths. Even if it doesn't feel like you do have any, I think you will come to realization that you do have some. So a prime example, and she won't mind me saying, one of my mum's friends, her son is really struggling in school right now, massively getting kicked out constantly. He loves cars. He adores cars. That is just what he loves. He knows all the different makes. He knows the prices of cars. He loves looking at the interior, the exterior, everything. But he, in life, he hates life unless it's about cars. And he didn't think he had any strengths. But then he noticed his strengths because, people say to him, well, I don't know this about cars. How do you know so much at such a young age? So I think, again, it comes down to finding your passion, which this is sort of, a different sort of topic to what the original question was from you, Alice. But I know that we've both found our passions, in regards to, me with my music and my neurodiversity public speaking and, wanting to make change to other people like myself and educate corporates and how we can be more neuro-inclusive. And I know you have with social media, creating communities, founded Lab Bible and Unilab. Them passions probably for a while took us, while we was doing them passions or creating those passions, or, probably all the negative thoughts, certainly in my head, left because I found my music, because I found my advocacy work. So I think it's about finding something, trying to find a passion, and actually ignoring the stereotypes and the negative things that people might say about you. Because, again, it comes back to what I said before. I think a lot of the time people feel like there is no positives of ADHD or being neurodivergent is because of society. And I go back to this because when I think about myself, I think actually, if society had been inclusive here, I would have thrived. So I do think my biggest advice to people listening to this podcast, who might feel like there's no positives about being neurodivergent, is there is a lot of positives. Just make sure you've got a supportive network around you. If you haven't, try to make sure that people understand you and are more inclusive of you, and actually find a passion as well. Because being neurodivergent, we have a lot of creativity in us, as we've said before. So you've definitely got passions there. It's just about finding them and actually not listening to all the negative stigmas and things like that. So yeah, Alex, I think people will resonate with actually, people that have been through the same experiences as them. And that's like why sometimes, things like LinkedIn, things like TikTok aren't the best. Because like you said before, they're either this end, amazing, everything's perfect, I'm earning millions of pounds, I'm living life, I've got yachts, my ADHD hasn't affected me. That's to the extreme. But then you've got, the other side where people are almost like how I was, suicidal, going down the wrong path. And that's all you hear. So you almost feel like you can't be in the middle because there's nothing really, out there that's sort of in the middle. And that's why, hearing from us is great today, because we've sort of both experienced the positives and the negatives and quite in the middle as such.
That's great advice, Jay. It really is. To say, I mean, yeah, ADHD has lots of strength, and if you're not experiencing them right now, that's not because you don't have them deep inside you. It's probably because you're just you haven't found your purpose or your passion, which I totally agree. Like before I found social media in 2010, I was pretty lost, I would say. I wasn't doing anything. I was working behind a bar, had no idea. I didn't know anything about ADHD then, but I couldn't put my thoughts in order for me to do what I wanted to do. I kind of wanted to go into acting. Also, I thought, okay, I've got to get an agent, and so I've got to do a headshot, but I couldn't put my thoughts in order to do the things I needed to do to achieve the goal that I wanted to do. And now I actually think about it, I think if I zoom out and look at that, I was like, did I really want to be an actor? And actually, I think the answer was probably no. I think it's because I saw a big film at the time, and I always had that moment of I want to do this. But I found social media in 2010, and that completely changed my life. And I'm still obsessed with it, and I'm still, 13 years later, I still wake up every morning and I build communities on social media. I think it's because it kind of gives me that dopamine loop. I post something online and I get immediate feedback, whereas things that have like a delayed gratification, I often lose interest in. And I guess, I don't know, do you find that's the same with your music?
Yeah, I'd say the same, to be honest, with my music. It's almost, to be fair, I had a lot of passions when I was younger. So, for example, acting has actually resonated with me when you said that, because I used to get told by teachers, by everybody, you're a born actor. I used to really enjoy it, and actually, I loved it. And I actually wish even now, I might start in the future, who knows, looking at maybe a career, seeing what I can get involved in. I am quite passionate about that area. I was also really into athletics as well. I was second best in Waltham Forest and East London at 800 metres. I always used to represent the borough, used to win all the sports days. I probably could have been an athlete for GB right now. I was getting really good times. But because I went down the wrong path, started doing the wrong things, I totally, ended that career, lost my stamina when I was running, stopped training, just hated that.
Mm.
So I think, yeah, definitely I agree. I mean, I think as well, I used to find loads of passions and then it sort of just burnt out, and then I found this and then it burnt out. And that's why really when my music came along, it's something I've still stuck with even to today. And actually the advocacy work even more so, and the public speaking. When I first started doing it, people saying how good I was, how I could relate to young people, how I could relate to neurodivergent people. I
Mm.
wanted to just do it more and more. So now, I've never looked back on my, public
Mm.
speaking and my music. This is what I want to do for life now. Obviously keep progressing it, maybe start my own business and stuff like that to do with it. But yeah, I get what you're saying. How when it comes to, I think being neurodivergent sometimes it can make you quite impatient, can't it? And that's why you see some neurodivergent people, switch jobs a lot of the time. Bored quickly and go from one job to another. But it's not because we're disloyal or we're not passionate about what we do. It's maybe just because we want new scenery, we want a new change, for example.
Yeah, I can see that 100%. Funnily enough, the jobs I've sort of stuck at in the past where I've are the ones that I've had a boss, like when I did the bar work or I did the hotel work previously. They're kind of the only things I didn't give up on when they got bored. And so I'm just going off on a tangent slightly, but I think that's because there's an element of, I don't know if you're the same, a people pleasing element within us, or certainly within me, or I'm motivated by doing other people's tasks or making someone else happy. Whereas if I'm left to my own devices, I've really got to be intrinsically into what I'm doing. Otherwise, I'm going to go through that famous sort of boom and bust cycle where I'm 100% in, and then a week later, I've got no interest in it. Have you ever had like jobs where you're an employee, I suppose, working behind a bar or doing something where you're kind of accountable to someone else, and that's kind of allowed you to stick at it?
I would actually say I'm the total opposite, Alex, to what you just said. Like the complete role reversal. I feel when I work by myself, that's where I'm at my best. That's why now I'm self-employed. I don't work for anybody. I do all my stuff. And the times that I have done work for other people, I just detest it. I like being my own boss, as it were. I like, not having that person tell me what to do. You need to, I want to be in control of what I do. So actually, it's the total opposite to you there. I get where you're coming from, though. I mean, there is a certain state where, but I think it's more just in general life, like when it's maybe like family or my girlfriend or somebody that, tells me to do something, but, it's for my benefits, for a positive. I don't mind that when actually, sometimes if I'm left alone to my own device, I won't get things done as such. But I think in regards to the workplace, stuff like that, no, I 100% love working for myself and actually having to, listen to other people, sorry if there's anyone who wants to employ me right now, I promise I am good. I'm not hard work. But yeah, no, I do prefer, working for myself.
Earlier, you mentioned masking, and it wasn't something I had in my sort of notes to bring up, but you mentioned it, and if you're happy to talk about it briefly, because I've I 100% masked, I suppose, consistently throughout my life. I mean, I'm probably masking a bit now subconsciously. I'm kind of just so on autopilot with it. Me, when I'm not facing someone or talking to someone, is very different to me. And I know probably a lot of people can say that. Us as humans just have a natural want to appear good in front of other people, so we do like put our best foot forward in that. But I think with me, and I imagine with quite a lot of other people with it, it's quite significant, the difference. And my girlfriend, for example, she sees my behavior when it's just me and her in the flat, and she's kind of used to it. I mean, it's not like anything too bizarre, but you wouldn't know the difference between like professional Alex, who goes to meetings and meets people and shakes people's hands and looks people in the eye, very different to what like my girlfriend says in the flat, where I'm jumping all over the sofa or being ridiculous with my dog. And again, these are things that I think a lot of people do, but for me, it's such a relief to sometimes come into my flat, close the door, and know the curtains are shut, and I can just, that's having to deal with the world done for today. Firstly, do you think you mask from like occasionally, and how extreme is like Jay public facing to Jay on his own or with people that he's close to and trusts?
To be fair, I mean, when I do some of the stuff, I am totally different. Professional Jay and Jay at home is, totally different. My girlfriend can say that, my parents can, it's even little things like if there's a football game on, I hear the chants in the background, just start chanting them, just certain little things like that I never do, in public, I wouldn't just start randomly singing or something like that. But I think, I mask a lot. Not as much now. When I was younger, I used to mask a lot. As much as I could, actually. And I feel like the times that I didn't mask, because actually it got so, tiring and got so actually like, this isn't me. That was when I did get in trouble, because I just let it, slip. And that's where I didn't get on in society. I think now I don't mask as much as I used to. I still mask quite a lot. There's even situations, when I go to like meetings, and it was like I did a talk the other day for a local authority for, and the guy there was very much, as soon as I got there, he was like, "Oh, how are you? How's your journey been?" And really like asking me questions, so many different questions, and really like looking at me in the eye, like, really quite intensely. And, I almost felt like I can't really be myself. I can't look away. So I almost had to be like, I changed. But I think in general, I do change quite a lot. If it's around maybe new people, I don't know, or even, if I'm out having a bit of fun, sometimes I actually have to think, because, when you're out, you have a bit of fun. If you actually, well, maybe I've been having a bit too much fun here. Maybe, people might start judging me and think, oh, wow, like, I don't really like the way he is. But again, I think this comes down to having supportive people around. It's just like what you're saying with your girlfriend. You can just shut the door and be like, I don't need to mask anymore. My girlfriend knows who I am, really, and, and embraces that, and it's not a problem. So I think, with people like around me, like my family, my, relationship, my cousin, whoever it may be, they understand me. I don't need to mask around them. And if I do mask around them, they'd probably notice and say, "What's up?" And they'd say, "No, you don't need to do that. We appreciate who you are." So I think masking is big. I think as well, masking is different for other types of people. Maybe even when it comes to like, women with ADHD, for example, and different types of groups in regards to the neurodiversity space. Actually, maybe they need to mask more because of like, societal norms and how people are supposed to act and stuff like that. I think definitely masking is a big thing, and actually a thing that should be spoken about more in regards to neurodiversity, because you almost have to mask yourself to be in that neurotypical world, to be in that world that actually was actually designed for neurotypical people. Actually, when you are in your sort of, your neurodivergent ways, you feel really left out, and actually like, this world wasn't made for me. So I think masking, is very important, and people should try and mask as less as possible, because again, if you have supportive people around you, you won't need to. But in society, I think, I'd say this to people maybe aren't neurodivergent here, just embrace us and embrace. We do have little quirks, we do have little differences, but actually, that just makes us who we are.
Yeah, no, spot on. That's great to hear, and I agree with it all. I think with I think eye contact is probably my most obvious to me form of masking. Like I try and maintain eye contact or I have done in the past, and there's a direct correlation between the amount of eye contact I give someone and the amount I'm going to remember of what they're saying. I can shake someone's hand and they can say, "Hi, my name's Chloe," or "My name's Bill," and if I'm making eye contact there, which is what you're supposed to do apparently, then I'm not going to remember their name, and I'm not going to remember pretty much anything they say. Whereas I've started to do it more now. I'm not so hard on myself if I'm breaking eye contact or I'm looking around the room a bit when someone's talking to me, and I've noticed there's been a massive uptick in the details that I'm remembering. And time blindness as well. Like, I know it's a big topic just on its own, but if I'm, like a lot of people do, you can go into a room with an objective and to get a glass of water, and you can forget what you're going in for. I always keep my eye on the subject that I'm going in that room for, and I've been doing that a lot more lately, and that could possibly look a bit unusual to like an outsider who's thinking, "Alex, your eye movement's a bit weird there," but that's something that which is probably subconsciously a form of masking before I've confidently walked into a room thinking that I'm going to remember what I'm going in there for. And most of the time I do, but actually quite often I don't. But now when I keep my eye on the reason why I'm going in the room, my time blindness symptoms get much, much better, which is really good. I want to get to the work you're doing now, because it's really inspiring. I think it really brings the story to a nice end with what's happened in your past to the amazing things you're doing now. But just before we get to that point, I want to quickly talk about imposter syndrome, because you're doing a lot of work on stages now, and I've done similar, and I'm getting better at imposter syndrome. I think I'm wondering, when you're on those stages and when you're talking at these big companies and at these big global events, do you ever think they've booked the wrong person, or what am I doing here?
Occasionally, but I know I'm quite talented from what I've been told. I know that I'm great at what I do, and I know that I was born to do that, and I'm very passionate about the topic as well. So say you asked me to go and talk on stage about something I had no interest in or no knowledge on, then yes, I'd be thinking, what the hell am I doing here? But I don't really, to be obviously sometimes it's like I did a conference last year, and there was about 1,300 people at the Bournemouth International Centre, and I walked up onto the stage, and there's a lower tier, there's an upper tier, and I thought, wow, people say to me like, how do you do this? And what it is with me, Alex, is actually if like say a company asked me to come in their office and there's like 20, 30 people there, I'm quite intimidated. It's quite daunting for me. But actually, the bigger a stage is, the more people that are watching, the bigger the event. I'm actually better at, not as nervous, and I thrive in it more. So, I mean, sometimes imposter syndrome, yeah, but again, I think that's maybe a lack of confidence thing due to some of the experiences I had, people not understanding me sort of thing. Actually, wow, this kid who got excluded from 2 schools, and this kid who nearly went to prison, and this kid who was drugged it, and all stuff like that is actually now on stages, speaking to big corporates, speaking to, people in senior positions that I could never imagine being in touch with. Yeah, it does hit you sometimes, but actually it's something you should be proud of. And, like in regards to yourself and what you've done, TEDx talks and huge talks, and what you've created with Lab Bio, I think actually you shouldn't have that imposter, because you should know the talent you've got, and actually you've created that. And that is you, that's not nobody else. So yeah. And one other thing, why we're on like imposter syndrome and stuff like that is, procrastination, which, again, it's a whole nother topic, but for me, I procrastinate a lot because of my ADHD. So even if it's like say I know I've got to get a train at say 10:05, and it takes me 15 minutes to get, to the train station, it might get to like 10 minutes before, and I haven't even put my shoes on yet. I haven't booked the train ticket, whatever, and I'm thinking, oh no. So I do procrastinate a lot. That was just one thing I wanted to get in this. Because I know a lot of people recently that have mentioned that to me when I've done talks about procrastination and the link with neurodiversity there. So yeah, but in regards to what you said about imposter syndrome, I'm proud of what I do. And I think, I'm there because of me and because of the talents I've got. But sometimes it is, quite not hard to, it's hard to believe when I do see myself in front of so many people and think, compared to where I was compared to now, it's quite amazing to see.
Definitely. And I think you're right. The bigger the stage is, we're going to get that sort of normal pre-talk jitters. But you're probably the same. As soon as you get that first word out, then you do feel like you should be there, and you get that applause at the end, and you do get that feeling of, oh no, they did book the right person. It's for me, the build up to the actual event is, I still sometimes get that when an email comes in and do you want to do this or that, and I have to double check the email address is right, and it is weird, and I've heard it's quite a sometimes common thing, but I guess it's just normal. I mean, but every time I do a talk, and then you get the round of applause, and then you get that validation, and you kind of feel like, oh no, they did put the right person. Especially when you get to meet the audience afterwards, and they ask you loads of questions, and you know the answers, and you can see the facial expressions, when you can see they're accepting, and you're delivering the value for them. Speaking of all the stage work and doing amazing things, you're an ambassador for the ADHD Foundation. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm an ambassador for the ADHD Foundation, a great neurodiversity charity that are out there. I'm an ambassador for Prince's Trust as well. I'm sure everyone here has heard, and ambassador for UK Youth as well. And I just like doing charity work on the side as well as what I do. I think, UK Youth, for example, they do a lot for youth, and they work with a lot of people from disadvantaged backgrounds. Prince's Trust, we all know what they do and the great work they do. And, I'm an ambassador for them and done some talk to them before and trying to spread the neurodiversity message in regards to the Prince's Trust. And the ADHD Foundation, I'm an ambassador for them for the longest amount of time. For about 2.5 years now. They're great. They really, do a lot in the ADHD space, but also neurodiversity in general, by going into schools, and they do tests, clinical tests and all different things. And they're amazing. I do a lot of advocacy work, ambassador work for people as well, and talks for, corporates and charities as well, and local authorities and schools and pupil referral units. And yeah, I love what I do, and I love trying to, tell my lived experience, using my lived experience to create a better living experience for other people. But actually telling people how we could be more neuro-inclusive. So, how we could be more neuro-inclusive to those 1 in 5. So, what I'd say to corporates, for example, what can we do to be more neuro-inclusive in the workplace? What would people like me, people like you, many others benefit from? Stuff like even starting from job applications to in the workplace, to, flexible hours, noise cancelling headphones for autistic people, for example. There's so many different things I talk about. And yeah, I think there's a real appetite at the moment, and you've probably noticed this, for lived experience talks. Not from, say, experts. And I do this because, I'm not being offensive. I'm not saying that's not valid. But actually, a lot of people now are listening more to people with lived experience like us than actually maybe people that have read up a lot about neurodiversity and maybe, own their own company, that have just, completed masters and had all degrees and stuff. There's a big appetite right now for this, Alex. And, I'm enjoying what I'm doing. My career's growing. I'm still a young age, 21, turning 22. So, still young, a baby, basically.
It's truly inspiring, Jay, and considering your age as well, I think you've probably jammed so much into your life already that a lot of people who are older will look back with huge admiration. I think you've done, and you're still doing, amazing work. And what do you see for the future? It's a big question, I know, but what's Jay doing in 10 years, do you think?
Even in 10 years, in 2 years, in 5 years, just growing, having more ambition, doing loads of things, Obviously, I'm still at a young age. I don't believe anybody really knows thoroughly what they're going to do until they're at least late 20s, early 30s. Society, a lot of the time, tries to force people into knowing what they want to do, as soon as they leave school. I don't think that's valid at all, and I don't think that's possible. So, of course, I'm going to keep up the speaking about my lived experience, but also about how we can be more neuro-inclusive. I'm looking to start my own businesses in regards to consultancy and stuff like that. And it's just so, and hopefully, my music career will, carry on releasing songs. I'm not going to say I want to sit here and be a chart-topping artist and, get in the billboard and stuff like that, but just keep doing it, releasing music that will inspire people, And yeah, I don't really set a limit on what, people always ask me, what are you going to do in 5 years? What are you going to do in 10 years? I don't know, whatever journey life takes me on, I will be there. You know, whatever opportunities I create for myself or other opportunities that are given to me, I will follow them. So yeah, great things. That's all. That's all I know. Great things, powerful
Mm.
things, or things that will make an impact.
That's amazing. And I think it was just going back to the what you're going to do in 10 years. I don't know if that was a helpful question to ask because it was, I spoke to someone the other day and his main advice was kind of to avoid burnout, was to not give yourself huge future goals. Make goals, but then really try and like break them apart on a day by day basis and just achieve little things day by day. And I thought that was really profound advice.
I agree.
But yeah, Jay, I think we'll probably leave it there. It's been so much fun, and I think the listeners are going to get a huge amount of value out of your story. I haven't met you, but I've met you once on the internet, and now we're chatting today, and um, I'm blown away by your story. It's really, really fascinating where you've come from, what you've been through, what you've done, and what you're doing now to raise awareness and to be a real voice for change and an advocate, especially with the stuff around neuro inclusivity in business. So thank you for coming on today, and I am genuinely excited about seeing what the future holds. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. Thanks for the invite. I'm looking forward to seeing this series and all the other amazing guests you get as well. And your story is great as well, and what you've done with Lab Bible and what you're doing now as well, you know, in regards to the neurodiversity space is amazing. So yeah, this has been an absolute privilege, a pleasure, and I hope everybody enjoyed. And please connect with me on LinkedIn and my website and stuff like that. But yeah, thanks everybody, and thanks Alex for the invite.
I'll put all of the links to all of your everything you're doing, all of the charities you're doing, all of your work, everything in the show notes, so they will be easily accessible to everyone. Jay, thank you so much.
Cheers, Alex.